In the quiet town of Birmingham, Alabama, a renowned judge and a young stranger embarked on a clandestine relationship that began innocently but ended in tragedy. This is the story of Claire Reynolds, a respected 45-year-old judge, and Evan Walker, a 24-year-old young man with a life marked by instability. What began as a chance encounter on a dating platform morphed into a bond that defied norms, and ultimately into a court case that shocked the country. Claire Reynolds was a prominent figure in the Alabama judicial arena. With a career spanning more than 15 years as a judge, she had earned respect for her impartiality and dedication to justice. Claire was known for her strong verdicts, especially in cases of sexual assault and gender violence, where she stood out for protecting the rights of victims. On a personal level, however, her life was much more complex. Widowed at the age of 39, Claire had devoted her life to work, finding little time for personal relationships. Close friends described her as reserved but passionate, with a strong sense of duty that often left little room for her own happiness. Evan Walker, by contrast, was everything Claire wasn't. Raised in a tough environment in suburban Birmingham, he'd spent much of his life searching for stability. With no steady job and a spotty academic record, Evan spent his days between temp jobs and nights out. He was charismatic, which made up for his lack of direction, and he had a knack for connecting with people. Claire and Evan crossed paths on an online dating app in March 2022. Although Claire was initially hesitant to strike up a conversation with someone much younger, she found Evan's freshness and spontaneity irresistible. What started as a casual chat quickly blossomed into a deeper connection. For weeks, Claire and Evan exchanged messages, discovering common interests and sharing confidences. For Claire, conversations with Evan were an escape from the rigidity of her everyday life. For Evan, Claire represented a figure of stability and maturity that he had never had in his life. On April 15, 2022, Claire and Evan met in person for the first time at a low-key cafe in downtown Birmingham. The encounter was electrifying. Claire was charmed by the energy and attention Evan gave her, while he was drawn to her intelligence and sophistication. From that point on, they began seeing each other regularly, although they kept the relationship a secret. Claire knew that her position as a judge meant that any relationship with a man so young and from such a different background could damage her reputation. Evan, for his part, seemed to enjoy the mystery and excitement that came with the secret. Claire and Evan's relationship was passionate but on and off. Their encounters were sporadic due to Claire's unpredictable schedule and Evan's carefree nature. However, they both seemed to enjoy the arrangement. For Claire, it was a chance to experience something out of the ordinary, while for Evan, it was an access to a world he had never known. On June 12, 2022, on a particularly intense night, Claire confessed to Evan that she was beginning to develop deeper feelings for him. Although Evan did not respond with the same emotional intensity, the relationship continued. Claire found herself increasingly committed, while Evan, although less emotionally involved, had no intentions of ending what he considered an exciting, no-strings-attached relationship. By September 2022, Claire and Evan had been in a relationship for over 6 months. While their connection seemed strong, the difference in their worlds was evident. While Claire continued to work on high-profile court cases, Evan began to show signs of frustration and instability. His lack of direction made him feel increasingly distant from Claire, though he maintained their bond for the comfort and support she represented. Everything changed on October 25, 2022, when Evan was arrested on rape charges. The victim, a 22-year-old woman named Rachel Turner, had reportedly reported that Evan had assaulted her in his apartment after a party. The news shocked Claire, who couldn't reconcile the image of the man she knew with the disturbing details of the case. The case was assigned to Claire's court, who was initially unaware of the defendant's identity. It was only when she reviewed the file before the preliminary hearing on November 1, 2022, that she realized the case involved Evan. The revelation left her in shock. For Claire, the conflict was clear. As a judge, it was her duty to ensure a fair and impartial trial. However, her personal connection to Evan put her in an extremely delicate position. Although she knew she should declare herself incompetent to try the case, she decided to proceed, convinced that she could separate her personal feelings from her professional duty. On November 5, 2022, the first hearing of the case was held at Birmingham Circuit Court. The courtroom was packed with the victim's family, legal representatives and members of the public, eager to witness the development of Evan Walker's case. Judge Claire Reynolds presided, looking more tense than usual, although making a conscious effort to maintain her professionalism. Evan, sitting next to his defense attorney, avoided looking directly at Claire. Although neither of them would admit it, The atmosphere was charged with a tension that went beyond the strictly judicial. For their part, the family of Rachel Turner, the young victim, looked at Claire with hope, hoping that the experience and fair character of the judge would guarantee an impartial trial. During the hearing, the prosecution presented a detailed timeline of the incident. Rachel Turner had reportedly met Evan at a college party on October 22, 2022. Evan, who attended as a friend's guest, had spent much of the evening chatting with Rachel. The two later left the party together, with Rachel agreeing to accompany him back to his apartment. Prosecutors alleged that once in the apartment, Rachel tried to leave after feeling uncomfortable, but Evan held her back and committed the assault. The details were shocking, with lead prosecutor Linda Graves emphasizing the physical and emotional trauma Rachel had suffered. Evan's attorney, Michael Callahan, argued that the relationship between his client and Rachel had been consensual. He presented text messages between the two that he said showed Rachel had willingly agreed to accompany Evan and that there was no conclusive evidence of coercion. He also questioned Rachel's credibility, suggesting that her allegations were an attempt to damage Evan's reputation following a personal dispute. Though the defense's argument seemed strategic, all eyes were on Claire. Her reputation as a strict but fair judge clashed with the nervous glances she exchanged with Evan, a dynamic that did not go unnoticed by even the most attentive observers. The trial formally began on November 15, 2022. The prosecution presented compelling evidence, including Rachel's statements, medical examinations, and testimonies from friends who were present at the party. Rachel recounted the events bravely, although her family struggled to hold back tears as they listened to her testimony. On the other hand, the defense attempted to counter the accusations by portraying Evan as a young man with no criminal record and by appealing to the lack of conclusive physical evidence. Meanwhile, Claire maintained a distant but increasingly uncomfortable posture. The nights following the hearings became a torment for her, as she struggled to balance her personal emotions with her professional obligation. On November 25, 2022, during the closing arguments phase, Claire committed an act that would change the course of the case. Instead of maintaining a neutral stance, she made comments that were interpreted as favorable toward Evan. In her remarks, she stated, "The defendant is young, with his whole life ahead of him, and he deserves to have his case evaluated as objectively as possible." Although she attempted to justify her words as a call for impartiality, the tone and context were clear to those in the room. Rachel's family was stunned. To them, Claire's words were a betrayal, an attempt to minimize their daughter's suffering in favor of the accused. The local community also reacted with outrage, and social media began to burn with criticism of Judge Reynolds. On November 30, 2022, the jury returned its verdict: guilty of second-degree sexual assault, a lighter sentence than the prosecution had sought. Evan was sentenced to 3 years in prison with a possibility of parole after serving one, a sentence many considered insufficient for the severity of the crime. Rachel's family was devastated. Her father, Mark Turner, a reserved but deeply protective man, felt particularly betrayed by Claire. In his mind, the relationship between the judge and the defendant explained the apparent concessions made during the trial. The days following the trial were marked by a wave of public outrage. Local media began investigating Claire, and rumors soon surfaced about her relationship with Evan. Although there was no conclusive evidence, social media comments and speculation fueled a climate of distrust towards the judicial system. Prosecutor Linda Graves requested a review of the case, arguing that Claire's conduct could have influenced the outcome. Meanwhile, Claire faced a media and professional storm, trying to maintain a calm facade as her world fell apart. For Mark Turner, the situation was intolerable. His daughter had been abused, and he felt the system had failed to protect her. Although he initially tried to channel his frustration through legal means, his anger intensified with each passing day. Claire's comments during the trial echoed in his mind, fueling a desire for revenge that he could not contain. On December 15, 2022, Mark made a drastic decision. He drove to the courthouse where Claire worked, waiting for the right moment to confront her. Although his initial intention was to demand explanations, what happened next was an explosion of rage that got out of control. On the morning of December 15, 2022, Claire Reynolds arrived at Birmingham Court like any other day, trying to focus on her duties despite the media pressure and public scrutiny. The building's hallway was quieter than usual, a calm that belied the events that were about to unfold. Mark Turner, Rachel's father, had been waiting near the courthouse since early morning. With a grim expression and an air of determination, he carried with him weeks of pent-up frustration and anger. When he saw Claire crossing the hall towards her office, he could no longer contain himself. Mark approached Claire and began to berate her. "How could you defend that monster? How dare you betray my daughter like that?" he shouted, his voice filled with anger. Claire, shocked by the confrontation, tried to calm him down, but her words only fueled Mark's fury even more. In an impulsive act, Mark struck her with a closed fist, knocking her to the ground. What began as a verbal confrontation quickly turned violent. Mark, blinded by his anger, continued to beat her, as court security personnel rushed to the scene. Screams from bystanders filled the hallway, and within minutes, Mark was subdued and arrested. Claire was rushed to Birmingham General Hospital, where she was admitted in critical condition. Doctors diagnosed multiple facial fractures, broken ribs, and severe head trauma. After hours of surgery, Claire was induced into a coma to stabilize her condition. News of the attack shocked the legal community and the general public, reigniting debate over the Evan Walker case and the trial that had divided opinions. Meanwhile, Mark Turner was arrested and charged with aggravated assault with intent to cause serious harm. Although some sections of the public expressed some sympathy for his actions, the law could not ignore the seriousness of what had happened. Claire's attack sparked an exhaustive investigation into the events leading up to this tragedy. Police reviewed records of Evan Walker's trial and rumors about Claire's relationship with the defendant. Although there was no conclusive evidence that Claire had acted in an intentional biased manner, her behavior during the trial was described as unprofessional by several legal experts. The prosecution, led by Linda Graves, used the attack as an opportunity to reopen Evan's case. They argued that the trial had been tainted by a conflict of interest and requested a review of the verdict. During his interrogation, Mark confessed his motivation behind the attack. "She let that man ruin my daughter's life and walk free after what he did. I couldn't just sit back," he said. His statement was straightforward and unapologetic, making it clear that he was willing to face the consequences of his actions. Mark's defense attorney, Joseph Hayes, attempted to argue that the attack was a product of an extreme emotional state caused by the trauma of recent events. Although the strategy was to reduce his sentence, the case against Mark was strong due to the strength of the evidence and the public nature of the incident. Meanwhile, Evan Walker was serving his sentence in a minimum security prison in Montgomery, Alabama. The reopening of the case added a new layer of uncertainty to his situation. Rumors about his relationship with Claire quickly reached the ears of his fellow inmates, making him a target for taunts and threats. Evan, who had already shown signs of emotional instability, began to deteriorate mentally. The prospect of a new trial also filled him with fear. Although he maintained his innocence, he knew that any additional evidence could increase his sentence. In March 2023, Mark Turner's trial began. During the proceedings, prosecution lawyers presented eyewitness testimony, CCTV footage, and Mark's history of behavior following the verdict in his daughter's case. The court heard how Rachel's family had been devastated by the original trial and how Claire's behavior during the proceedings had exacerbated their grief. Mark's case attracted significant media attention, with opinions divided between those who saw him as a protective father pushed to the limit and those who considered him an aggressor who had acted in an unjustifiable manner. On April 18, 2023, Mark Turner was found guilty of aggravated assault and sentenced to 12 years in prison, with a possibility of parole after serving 7 years. The sentence was met with mixed reactions, but even his most ardent defenders acknowledged that his actions had crossed a line. In May 2023, after nearly 5 months in a coma, Claire Reynolds awoke. Although her physical recovery was progressing, the emotional and psychological after-effects of the attack were evident. Claire decided to step down from her position as a judge, stating that she could no longer effectively carry out her responsibilities. In a public statement, Claire expressed regret for the decisions she made during the Evan Walker trial. "I allowed my personal life to interfere with my duty as a judge, and for that, I take full responsibility. What happened next is a tragedy that should never have happened." The story of Claire, Evan, and Mark became a landmark case that highlighted the complexities of justice, human emotions, and the consequences of impulsive decisions. For many, it was a warning about how mistakes in positions of power can trigger tragedies that affect multiple lives. The Birmingham legal community implemented significant policy changes, including tighter controls on potential conflicts of interest and emotional support programs for judges and prosecutors. Rachel Turner's family, while still struggling with their loss and the impact of the events, found some comfort in the legacy of her case. Love, justice, and revenge intertwined destructively in this story, leaving a trail of pain and regret. Although the lives of those involved took different paths, the case left an indelible mark on the community and served as a reminder of how our decisions can have unpredictable consequences.